thanks for watching the video. This is that computer that we're putting together. A few months ago, James was talking on the thing to Kylie, and talking about how his dad is so nuts about building computers. And Kylie said, well, could his dad build me a computer? And I said, that's a great idea. So I said I would find the parts that I could that just were like really excellent prices, like low prices, and try to put together the best low-cost computer I could. And some people were really generous and actually gave us stuff. For example, I helped James's friend Katie with her computer, and she had these extra sticks of RAM, that's the memory, that she just gave us for free. So that's going to go in there and make this even lower cost. And then the most important part of a computer that's going to run any games is the graphics card. And I found this one for what I thought was a really great price. I was going to pay $50 for it. I met up with the guy and I even paid him his money, but I told him about how I was building this and it was going to be for my niece and her family. And he said, well, he had just built one for his nephew and their family. And so then as I'm driving home, I get a little message on my phone and he refunded me all the money for it. He said he was giving it to us for free. He said, hope your niece has fun with it. So usually one of the most expensive parts and definitely one of the most important parts came in for free on this. So that's another great price. So this computer is mostly because Kylie asked for it, but we're going to give it to Kathy and Mike, right? This is Kathy and Mike's computer that they can use for their kids, and we're sort of thinking that Kylie would probably get some good mileage out of it, and hope you guys have a fun time with it. So I want to tell you about the parts here, and then once I've told you about the parts that I have, or rather that you guys have that's in your computer, and then James is going to come over and record it better so that we can show how it gets all assembled. So I think I'll start with the motherboard. So the motherboard is basically just, it's the network that connects all the other parts of the computer together. And then right in the middle of the motherboard, I already installed this, but I'm going to have a video of installing it later. This is the CPU. It stands for Central Processing Unit. It's an Intel Core i3-8100. You can't quite read that there, but and this motherboard is an ASRock B360M. Here it has an integrated Wi-Fi card, but we may not use that because I have another Wi-Fi card that has Bluetooth, and by using Bluetooth you'd be able to connect video game controllers, wireless video game controllers if you wanted to. And then it also here, this right here, this tiny little thing, you know, like a little bit bigger than my thumb, that is 512 gigabytes of storage, and that's where your main Windows drive is going to run off of. So motherboard, I already showed you the RAM. This kit, each of these is 4 gigabytes for a total of 8 gigabytes. I'm going to keep looking around to see if I can upgrade that to 16 gigabytes because that's really best nowadays. But 8 gigabytes for free, can't argue with that. And it will still definitely run with 8 gigabytes. Let's see. Oh, and one of the neat things about this i3-8100 is that it is one of the easiest CPUs, like lowest budget entry level CPUs that you can still run Windows 11 with. So right now this is probably just going to have Windows 10, but if you wanted to upgrade to Windows 11 later, you'd be able to. And that's, I think, kind of exciting. Like I said, I have this Wi-Fi card, so this will have Wi-Fi and Bluetooth on it, so we'll install that there too. And next is the power supply. I'm going to brag about this power supply. So this is one of the best companies that makes power supplies that you can buy. This 450 means it's 450 watts, which is actually really going to push the limit because your graphics card takes a whole lot of electricity. So we're going to have to test out and make sure it'll even work. If it doesn't work, I have a backup, but I'm really hoping we'll be able to use this because, like I said, I was trying to put this together like as low cost as possible. I bought this power supply for only $5, which is just terrific. Really, really terrific. And then one of the interesting things is that computing happens by sending little bits of electricity back and forth on very tiny channels. And when you do that, it gets hot. And so you have to be able to keep the things cool. Cooling is a big part of making a computer work well. And the cooler you can keep it, the better it'll work. And in fact, a lot of computers, when they realize, like they have their own sensors in there, and when they know that they're operating cool enough, they'll actually operate even faster. So that's why we have this This is another thing that I'm excited to try because I watch computer part technology video reviews a whole lot, like feels like all the time, and the online YouTube guys found this cooler right here is like one of the least expensive but like best good coolers you can have. So you can see there's a fan here. It's going to blow through basically a radiator of metal fins, and that'll help. It'll mount right onto the CPU and keep the CPU cool. But speaking of cooling, you probably noticed this is the graphics card, and you know, like the computing part all connects to this bottom plate at down here, but all of this, these are fans that blow on another basically sort of radiator in there. I don't know if you can see the fins, probably not in this angle. Yeah, metal fins in there behind that they blow through to keep the graphics part cool. And of course, it wouldn't be a computer, and we wouldn't, well, I mean, it would be a computer, but we wouldn't have really built a computer worth anything if we don't put it inside some sort of a case. La-la! Here it is. Oh. Alright, so this is the case for your computer, and for me the case is one of the most fun parts to get to choose, because like, they might change how a computer works. They might do different things with the chips and stuff in it, and I can't look at that and tell it's any different, but when I get the case, I can tell what's different in the case by just looking at it. And I look at cases a lot, even when I don't need cases, and that's what happened with this one, is I actually just saw that this looked like a good case that does the things I want it to do for a really good price. But I didn't even have a computer to build it with. I actually bought this before I knew I was going to build your computer, just because I was so excited about it. So that's one of the fun things about building this computer for you, is that it gives me an excuse to sort of get some of the stuff that I wanted. So starting here at the front, we have these protected plastic peels on here. I'm going to take them off. You can see why they call it silver, is that it has this silver color panels in front. And there's this lighting display along the middle that you'll see lighted up later, and then there's vents here for air intake. But even more important than those air intakes is all this airflow space that's up here on top. This is a magnetic filter, so it can come right on and off again. And then you see this right here is just a grate that air can flow straight through. Now coming around to look at the side of the case, this whole panel here is solid glass, which is good because it won't scratch much. By the way, this panel on the front is a little bit plastic, so that could scratch easily. So we'll try to be careful with that. And I want to show you the back. So air blows out here. This is where you're going to connect your video card, and then this is where your power supply is going to show out, and you'll be able to plug in the power supply in the back. Last of all, the power supply is going to draw in air from underneath, so it's going to have its own airflow system going on. It's going to pull it up from underneath, and it's going to go through this filter, which, by the way, this filter is nicer than I expected, too. The fact that it has a frame, it'll be easy to clean. Your power supply fan is probably going to run a lot of the time because it's only 450 watts. But that does mean also that this computer should not be set onto a carpet. It should always be on a tabletop, or if you need to set it on the floor, set some sort of a hard board or even a cardboard underneath it so that it's not jammed up with the carpet underneath. So that's the case, and I'm excited to start putting stuff together and putting it in here. Alright, so as we were introducing all of these parts, I sort of just laid them out here, and so now I have a lot of sensitive electronics on the table, and I want to protect them by putting them in their spots, so I'm going to get right into building this thing. The very first thing I'm going to do is install the CPU, the central processing unit. I pull this thing out, and this retention arm has tension on it to hold it in place. Under here, these are little tiny ends of wires that can very easily bend, like super easily bend, and if they bend, that can ruin a whole computer. So, got to be super careful with that. I'm going to align the CPU, and this, by the way, if you just drop this on here the wrong way, that could bend one of those wires. So I have to be super careful doing this, set it in the right spot, and drop it. Okay, that's good. And now I'm going to close this thing, and as I close it, this plastic thing slides off the top. That was a protective cover to protect those little wires. So now our CPU is in. I'm going to next install the SSD that's going to have Windows on it and be your main drive. So I slide this in here. It's designed on purpose to go in at an angle and then rock down. Maybe zoom out to this side and show how it goes in plugs in at an angle, and then it rocks down, and then I just have to screw this teeny little screw in here to hold that in place. A little clumsy. And that's okay. All right. All right, that tiny screw is going to hold that in place. So now your SSD is mounted. This kind, they call it an NVMe. They're super fast. Like when they first started making SSDs, that was a big deal because of how much faster they were. And this is even faster than an SSD. So this is your RAM. That's the memory, right? Push it down, click it. Perfect. Same with the other one. If this thing doesn't boot up later, the most common cause of failures to boot is because your RAM is not in place like it should be. Okay. Go ahead and cut. All right, next I'm going to install the graphics card. I'll be taking this apart later. I'm just putting this together now so that we can test it out and make sure all the parts are working. And so this bad boy is gonna go, this long thing here goes into this long slot, and then this hangs over the edge. And once I've got it in place, I'll push it down and make a little click. Okay. Okay, now I'm gonna plug in the electrical connections for this. They all come from the power supply. So much of computing is sending little bits of electricity through tiny little circuits, so you have to be really careful with how that electricity is managed. That's why you can't just plug this straight into the wall. That would fry your whole computer. It has to go through this that converts the power and different frequencies and such. Okay, so plug the main power into this big ol' honky chonky 24-pin connector, like so. This one here is made just to deliver electricity to your CPU. Oh, where did it go? Here it is. So click this in here. And then the only other place that we need power for now is in your graphics card. And as I said before, your graphics card draws a whole lot of power. Really, honestly, probably more than is best to use with this power supply, but we're trying to make the budget work. So in order, this is going to connect with two connectors, but I only have one wire that's made from this power supply to connect to that. So I bought an adapter, so I plug the adapter in here, and then I plug both ends of the adapter in place here, and almost ready. This thing has a extra couple of pins that I need to slide out of place in order to connect it in that second spot. So this thing's a little tight, and that's okay. There we go. So now I can put this 6 more pins in there. So now it has the connections it needs to the power. Hopefully it'll have enough power. All right, so now I'm gonna plug in the monitor to the computer. Make sure you plug it into this connector on the graphics card. Otherwise you lose all of that computing power. If you try to plug it into the motherboard, it might still show a picture, but you won't actually be able to run things very well. I have now plugged in a keyboard and a mouse to the back of the motherboard. So honestly, this is a whole computer built right here. It's just not inside of its case, and this allows us to test it before we really start doing the hairy stuff and putting it all together. I know that each of these parts works because I've tested them all separately. I just don't know if they work perfectly together, and the main problem is whether or not this power supply is going to provide enough power for this graphics card. So I'm going to turn on the switch at the back of the power supply. Right here is on, and look, nothing happens. That's okay, it's not supposed to happen. Now I need to use a screwdriver to make a little electrical connection in order to tell this thing to turn on. All right, so I hit it. We can already see these fans spinning. This one started spinning, that one didn't. Oh, look here. Oh, look here, look here. Okay, it showed us a picture on the screen. Yes. Okay, we are into Windows. So far, so good. And not too surprising, actually, that this got this far, because we're not actually making the computer work very hard. So the next thing I need to do is I'm going to get into Windows, and I'm going to run a couple of things called benchmarks, which is things that are in programs that are intentionally designed to do like basically nothing, but make your computer work really hard. And when those are working really hard, if this continues to be stable, then we'll know that this power supply is going to do a great job taking care of your graphics card and making everything run great. Okay, I made a really silly mistake. I was so excited I got everything loaded up, and it's running. You see it's running just fine, but I didn't even put a cooler on top of the CPU. So come in here and show the CPU. That should have a cooler on it right now, and the fact that it hasn't shut down is, first of all, risky, and I'm lucky and stupid. Second of all, it's kind of cool because it shows that this is not drawing a lot of power from the CPU, which is the reason why it can keep running, and on its own it doesn't make a lot of heat. So I'm going to install this cooler. This is not your cooler, this is just an extra one I have around that I know is easy to just set on there. And usually you don't want to plug things in and unplug them from the computer while it's running, but I happen to know that the only thing I'm really plugging in here is the fan, and I know that that'll be okay. So come in here and show the CPU, James. I'm going to put this is called thermal paste. This helps make sure that there's no air bubbles between the CPU and the cooler. And it's just going to make a very thin layer of grease that conducts heat really well. Ah, shoot, that is literally hot. Like, that like burned my finger. Oh, man. I did not see that one coming. It almost shocked me. Like, I'm glad I didn't hurt some of the computer parts just now. Okay, so I'm going to set this on its place. And I am going to plug this in. That is was way hotter than I expected it to be. Okay, so as soon as I plug this in, the fan instantly kicked on because it knew it needed to. And
listen to that.
I don't know if that'll pick up in the camera, honestly, but
you can hear it running.
But it's okay. So now it's blowing. Now, hopefully, this will start cooling quickly. I have a program that I've already loaded up here called MSI Afterburner, and I'm going to look at MSI Afterburner to show me how hot the CPU actually is right now. Okay, CPU temperature, do you see this? It was all the way up at 100 degrees. Oh my gosh, that's way too hot for this. That was not good. But then as soon as I put the cooler on, look at this. It dropped from 86 degrees all the way down to 32 degrees. Celsius. This is not Fahrenheit, this is Celsius. If it's 32 degrees Fahrenheit, it'd be freezing. But no, that means this is like boiling water temperature when I put my finger on that thing. That hurt. And I learned something.
Would you be willing to touch it right now that it's 30?
Oh yeah.
To prove it?
I'm not gonna, because I don't want to take the cooler back off. That would be, dangerous for the computer. But it's really surprising that all I had to do was set this thing on here. That's all I had to do is set that thing on there to bring it all the way from 86 degrees Celsius, almost boiling temperature, drop almost immediately down to 32 degrees. That is really impressive. So having a good cooler makes a real difference, even though they look so simple. And so now I'm going to start actually running these benchmarks. Had I started running benchmarks while this had no cooling on it, it would have done two things. First, it would have slowed the whole computer way down because it would say, hey, we're getting way too hot, and we don't understand why, because it doesn't know that it doesn't have a cooler plugged in. And then eventually it would have stayed too hot for too long, and the whole thing would have just shut down. It wouldn't give me a message that said it's too hot or anything, it would just died. And then I'd be sitting here going, what's wrong? What did I do wrong? Well, silly Jay, you didn't even plug the cooler in, that's what's wrong. And so where it should have been at around 30 degrees, it was at 100 degrees. Yeah, big learning here. All right, so I did the testing, couldn't get the graphics card to work. I'm going to have to replace the fans. So the graphics card is sitting over there, and we'll need to wait a few days for the parts to arrive so I can fix that. But that's fine because the graphics card is usually the last thing that you actually install into the case when you put the computer together in the case anyway. So we'll build the rest of this stuff into here, and then we'll be able to wait a few days for this stuff to come. So the next step for me is to install the cooler onto the motherboard. Then the motherboard's going to go in here, the power supply is going to go in here, and I'm going to start connecting stuff. Stand in the place where you live, think about direction, wonder why you have it now. Stand in the place where you work, about the place where you live, wonder why you have it. People, if you are confused, check with the sun, carry a compass to help you along. Your feet are going, feet on the ground, your head up the stairs to move you around. So stand in the place where you live, think about direction, wonder why you have it now. Stand in the place where you work, think about the place where you live, wonder why you have it. Your feet are going. probably in closer than I would have intended. And I think you're in a lot closer than I would have intended. I'm not going for like a micro shot. I'm just going for a closer shot. Okay, that's maybe get from the side so you can show where this clip is going. Yeah, like I said, I figured this shot was going to be pretty clumsy. I almost got it. There, that's part one. And now come on over here for part two. There we go. Stop it. Okay. Good. All right, and you can cut now. So the front panel really just kind of snaps off. I already unsnapped it, but I pulled it off and I was like, oh, how come the wires aren't connected? And where are the lights? There's lights. Oh, well, look, the lights all just stayed right here. That's actually super handy that I can do that without having to worry about any connections or anything. And then I had to do that because now that the front of it's open, I can stick the fans in here and put the screws in through this side. This through here. All right, that's enough. All right, that's enough. And since the fans are in, I'm almost ready to install the motherboard. I'm gonna lay the case down on its back. And one thing that's pretty easy to forget before you put the motherboard is that this little fella needs to go into the back here so that it fits snugly around all the connectors for the motherboard. And before we do that, I need to put the antennas on there. So they'll go through here and I'll fasten them on with these little nuts. And with these little Wi-Fi connectors in place, I can now put this back plate where it goes. Like so. There we go. Just snaps into place. It snaps into place if I can get it to snap into place. Alright. I think I got it. There. Normally you might want to lay this down for this next part, but I think it's going to record better if I do it this way, so I'm going to carefully grab the motherboard by this heatsink here, or the cooler I keep calling it. Throw these cables through the back. And then I'm going to line up these USB ports and stuff with the back panel that you saw me place just a minute ago.
now I'm carefully balancing this so I can put the first screw in through the middle. Once I have that first one in place well enough, it'll make sure it won't fall. I can put in the rest of these screws. And these Wi-Fi connector wires, they have these itty bitty tops on them. You just sort of snap them right into these little bitty buttonholes. You see that? Or, you know, like sometimes on your winter coat, you'll have a thing that snaps on or snaps shut. That's what these are, except they're itty bitty bitty. They can also come undone easy. So like once we start this up, if it's having trouble with Wi-Fi, that could be an easy explanation of why.
With these connected, it's now time to install the power supply. It's going to go in here. So you can see this is where our power cord's going to go. This is your power switch. Here is the power supply in the back of the case, and all these wires that we need to send in the right direction or hide away. And on the front side of the case, looking super clean, shows your good power supply. So I have basically loosely put the big cables in place, and I put the hard drive cage back in its place. So now I can slide out this little tray, and that is what we're going to put the hard drive into. Now you're getting a 1 terabyte hard drive for extra storage. The reason why you do that is it's cheaper to get this kind of storage than it is to get more SSDs. And so don't have to spend as much money and you have more space to put stuff. However, this is used, and a used hard drive is more likely to fail. So you don't want to store things on here that are very valuable to you that you can't lose. But if you have something like, you know, a video game that you got from Steam, so you can download it a million times if you need to onto just a different drive every time, you can put that on here to make it run, and you won't have any troubles with that. So I just snap this thing into place on its little sled. There are holes, little screw holes that these little pegs are going to go into. And I should be able to do this without having to get any tools out. Okay, so I think I just gotta put this in place and then sort of pop it down. It doesn't feel very good because it's kind of firm, but stretching it into place, there we go. Got the front one, got the back. Yeah, so now it's on its little sled, and you see there's still a spot here at the front where the cables will still be able to connect. But we tuck it in here and it's nice and out of the way. I also want to show you, I think I mentioned before, there's this place here where you can put an extra SSD in here, which is kind of cool. There's a spring here to open the gate to connect or disconnect it, and then you just have to slide it in here and snap it in place. But there's an extra one of those. So down in this bottom spot, you could put in a full-size hard drive like the one you just saw, or I'm just leaving this extra piece of plastic in here. This is another one of these same little cases that you can put another SSD in, and there's places in the front of this case that you could mount that if you want. I've got the hard drive in place. Now I need to pull out this power cable that connects to the hard drive. Notice how there's two connectors here? That's so you can connect one in the bottom spot and one in the top spot. So I'm going to leave that bottom one available
and I'm gonna plug in this top one so that it can get its power source. And later, if you decide to add, it'll just be there and ready. There's a whole nother cord coming out that has the same kind of connector on it. And this one is going to connect the power for the lights in your case. That's this little guy that drips on down this way. Stuff the rest of this back here because we're not going to need it anymore. It's connected as much as it needs to be connected. But we do have all these other cables. They all got to go someplace. So it's time to start turning this around, and I'll show you where these main cables connect. And then we get into cable management. Cable management is tedious. I can guess that this whole video might have been a little tedious already. It's pretty long. But I won't make you watch me do all the cable management, but it's all about getting the cable from where it needs to go, either from the power or a data connector, and then connect from one end to the other end. But you want it to look good. You want it to be smooth in between there, you know? You want the cables to be bunched together. You don't want to leave it looking all gross and wiry, just because it's gross and wiry, and you're going to have a Studley computer that's going to look schmick and clean.
Studley?
Yep, Studley. Here are the main power connectors that I've pulled to the front. This one is for your graphics card. This one is the 24 pin that goes to the motherboard. And then back here, hidden underneath, this is the other one that goes directly to your CPU. So I'm going to lie this computer on its back, all those cables trailing out underneath it, so that I can connect these. Big guy goes here. Got to get it to line up. There we go. And this connector here gets plugged in the top. This one's kind of hard to get to, but if I can line it up. A lot of people plug this one in before they even put the motherboard in, and I can understand why. All those extra cables that were in the back just now, I've threaded them through to the front, so I'm going to show you what each one is and where they need to go. This one belongs to a fan, and I just know this because I've done this enough to remember which one goes to a fan. So it'll need to plug into one of these spots, like that. This one here connects the lights, so it connects up in here to the top. And this will need to, we'll connect the lights from this fan here in the front, and also to these lights that are on the front of the case, so that they'll all be doing the same lighting style at the same time. So those need to connect together. This right here is your audio cable. So that's going to plug in here in the back. This one here is your USB cable for normal USB, so that's going to go near the middle. And
what's the blue one?
The blue one is USB 3, so it's also USB, but it's a lot faster. It connects right up here to the top. And it goes into one of these chunks. Yeah, it goes into this chunker here. But the reason why I'm not plugging them in right now is I end up plugging these in and unplugging them several times so that I can get them to overlap just the way I like, so that they look as clean and smooth as possible. And so that they run in like straight lines. I don't want them to look like they're crisscrossing. I try to hide the smaller cords with the bigger cords. Just anything I can do to make it look more orderly and intentional instead of just looking like it was just, you know, spat out there by a hyperactive spider. The hardest part in terms of plugging these things in is these teeny tiny, they call them jumper pins for the front panel. So this one will do the power switch. This one does the power lights, and there's just one little set of pins under here that those are going to go to, and it's tough to do that. But so yeah, it's time for me to start routing these, and we'll see if I can make it look good.
finish the cable management, it took me an hour and a half. And I loved it, but I hated it, but I loved it too. And that's why I'm a real nerd.
For perspective, imagine untangling headphones for...
yes, that's a good perspective. So this big cable here wanted to keep sticking out, and if it's not flush with this side, then we won't be able to put the side cover back on. So that was a problem. But eventually I sort of stapled it down here, and I just didn't know where to bring these cables through. The first part was getting the top in here, and this was the ugliest to start with, and now that was just about actually the easiest part. It still looks ugly, and like, if you ever need to work on this computer, or someone ever needs to work on this computer, they're going to go, gosh darn it, why did somebody go through all this trouble to tie up all these things? It just makes more pain to work on it later. But in the meanwhile, it looks good and clean.
I think, Dad, a good computer should look just a little bit messy and complicated, so that people will look at it and say, that's some computing right there.
That's pretty complicated. I don't know if I could do that right. Maybe that's the thing. Anyway, but eventually I figured it out, and so I'm just happy to.
Is there a
see
reason that text is upside down? And
yes, because this is on the power supply, and so this power supply is made so no matter which way you put it, whether you put it fan facing down like it is right now or fan facing up, that the front side of the power supply will show out the front with the letters
oh, that's
right
good.
side up.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to say those letters are bothering me, but that's on the back, and this is where the glass panel will go.
Yeah, that's right. And so now it's time to plug in the power to the graphics card and install the graphics card, and then we get to pull out the monitor and we'll plug these things in and fire it up and see how it looks. But yeah, so with it laying down flat, then gravity is going to help us to make sure this panel gets in all the little slots that it needs to fall into in order to sit in there like it should.
What's that back panel made out of, Dad?
It's either really thin steel or aluminum, I'm not sure. So screwing these in, but that did go in really easy, so none of the cables are bumping out so far that it's making a problem, so that's a good thing.
Were you worrying about that?
I was. Especially the two that crossed out over here like this, and that great big one. Okay, so that is put together. Now I can install the graphics card. Gotta make sure that this little tab is open.
If he makes one wrong move here, the whole thing breaks.
Okay, it's so heavy now that I don't want to let go of it without putting at least one of the little support screws in. There's plenty of graphics cards that you'd be fine leaving just stuck into the motherboard like this, but this one's just so heavy I'm not going to do that. The computer is all built. I've connected everything, the keyboard, the monitor, the mouse, everything's plugged into power. There's two little things I have to show you on the back of this case before we actually turn it on. Number one is these antennas. We're going to disconnect these because you can't put it in the box and travel with it safely with these things connected. So you'll have to reconnect those. If you don't reconnect those, you'll get cruddy Wi-Fi connection. But it's better than using Wi-Fi is if you can plug in an Ethernet cable and use the Ethernet connection instead. That would still be way better. But anyway, you want to have your antennas. My brother had the same setup, and when his antennas weren't connected, he couldn't get any Wi-Fi. He connected them, and then the Wi-Fi worked great. The other thing is down here at the bottom, this is the power supply. This is going to be turned off. That's a protective thing for the computer. And if you don't turn that on, then the computer won't turn on and you'll be like, uh-oh, what's wrong? So now that you know those two things, it is time to fire this thing up. Time to turn it on. One thing I got to tell you, this has a window here. I'm not putting that window on because I'm not actually superstitious, but computer builder superstition is you never put the final panel on until you've actually started up and make sure it works. So, turn on the power supply at the back. You should see a few lights.
Ooh, oh, I didn't think the keyboard would glow.
And then now it's time to push this button here to turn the computer on.
Oh wait, that's so cool.
The fan is awesome.
Okay, so it's posting right here, James.
Can't even-
Can you show the post?
See that? Oh,
Well,
maybe you don't press.
alright, and so we are now into Windows. We're going to rename it. I also want to show how this computer looks with a side glass put on it. It still has this protective peel on it. We're going to keep that on so that it won't get fingerprinty, or I sort of think that'll help not get scratched.
And so
now.
you can peel it off.
Yeah, so Kylie can peel it off once she gets it. I am going to take the back off. How about that? The back has a plastic that I'm going to take off right now.
That is just as satisfying in the video, or in real life, as it is in the video.
And now, stick this in. You're supposed to go top first. It actually says lay the computer down before you do this. Top first.
That means you're a professional, because you know when to ignore the rules.
That's right. And then has these 4 little screws, one in each corner. And so you can see that tinting on the window sort of dims what's coming from the inside there. I'm just super proud of this computer. I'm really happy at how it looks and how it turned out, and it's super fun to build.